morning, everyone. This is Abhinav Agarwal, and welcome to our latest edition of the Indica Books Writers Open House with Otis. You all know the drill by now. I won't go over it. We have, I think, for this week, enough pieces. In fact, thank you, Ram, for sending 2 pieces. I think people are getting back into the groove of sending writing pieces, so we will have enough to cover today. I will share a link for a WhatsApp group that we have for this open house, and it is obviously completely optional for anyone who wants to join. And I'll turn this over to you, Otis.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see where we're at. Okay, we had Deepa's piece a couple weeks ago, and we haven't been able to get to it. So I see that she's here. So why don't we start with your piece, Deepa? And let me share my screen. Host disabled, participant screen sharing. So I got Abhinav. I need you to.
Yeah. You should be all set now.
Okay. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay. Deepa, are you there? Could you read a little bit of this piece? Hi, how are you?
Hi, Otis. Good, how are you?
Great. So maybe actually with this piece, what I would love is to get your opening. So I'm gonna mark. Oh no, I don't want that. I want this. So maybe I'll have you start by just reading this opening so we can get a sense of the opening, and then I'm gonna. There's a lot of this piece I'd like you to read, but I'd like you to go ahead and read this interaction too at the end, and maybe you could just finish that. So those 2 sections, and maybe because you're going to read those 2 sections and that's a little strange, maybe you could just set us up a little bit and tell us what this story is about first. Is that okay?
Sure. So basically, this is the opening to a novel, which is supposed to be a historical romance. I don't know if it comes through, but this is like 10th century Tamil Nadu in a village, typical temple town. And yeah, I don't know if it's a bit disjoint, because you also mentioned there that what is the context, etc. So this is supposed to flow into the rest of the thing. So this is basically an agraharam, which is like a Brahmin locality. There are these villages where these roads end in temples. So the main road branches off into these side streets, and at the end of the street is a temple. So if you turn into the street, the first thing that you see at the end of the street is a huge temple gopura. On both sides, you have these houses. So that's like a mini ecosystem by itself. And everything revolves around the temple rituals, and then it's a little world by itself. So I just wanted to pick 2 people from there, and 2 young people from there, and see how they interact with each other and how their environment kind of affects their relationship and where it goes.
Okay. I'm trying to understand all of that. Is this an actual town that exists someplace? Is this a town in fact?
I have a model in
like
mind.
These towns?
Yes,
You do?
I have a specific town in mind, which is my father's hometown called Mailadurai, which is a bustling near city now. It's like a tier 2 kind of a city, but once upon a time, I can imagine it to be a sleepy town when I used to go there for my summer vacation. It was pretty much a sleepy little street with just the temple, and all these people are out of my memory as a 7-8-year-old child there. So.
And there and in this piece, they're engaged in a ritual, which is that you're making a pattern of some kind outside of your door, and
Yes.
that's right, and that has a kind of it's like a religious ritual, it seems like.
It's very cultural as well. Everybody, it's across most of South India. It's called the kolam, and everybody makes it outside their house except if there is a tragedy in the house or something. So that's it's a very cultural indicator. If I did not make the kolam outside, it indicates that something has happened, or uh, you know or it's one of those days when you're celebrating like the death anniversary of somebody, and therefore you're not supposed to make that. So it's a very auspicious thing, and like a must do every morning.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. And can I ask you a question? You said 10th century. Is there a different Hindu calendar that doesn't ascribe to like a year zero?
Yes, so there are several, and a couple of the popular ones that are found in inscriptions are the Shaka era and the Vikram Sambats, which are plus minus about 75, 78 years, 55, 58 years. I always get those years confused, but it's plus or
Hmm.
minus from zero or one C from our common era. It's plus minus 70 odd
Uh-huh.
years. So it's
Oh,
pretty
okay.
pretty similar.
Right. So yeah, that's not that far off. That's interesting. Huh. Okay. Great. Well, let's let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
Why do you want to place this in the 10th century rather than in, let's say, present day or not too distant past?
Actually, that's something I'm still working on. So this is supposed to be, like these large temples were getting built around that time. Of course, even 500 years before that, in the 5th century, several large temples were getting built. That whole temple culture was getting established. I want to trace. This is actually uh, it's pretty ambitious, and probably for a first project, but it's across 2 3 time lines. So there is something happening in the present day in the same village, what it is today, something happening, and then as a parallel world we see what happened earlier as well. And these characters most likely are in new avatars in the present day as well.
Hmm.
So, and there is some kind of continuity that happens. Unfinished business gets carried over and gets resolved through this whole temple and temple history and what's happening today and all that. And I don't know if I need to push it as far back as the 10th century, or even like 100 years ago would suffice uh, to give that sense of unfinished business and getting resolved through whatever happens at the temple. But I want that thing of 10th century is because the Tanjore temple was getting built at that time. The historic, that really large Rajaraja Chora's temple. I somehow wanted to integrate it into the story, saying that temple
Uh-huh.
was getting built. And I don't even know if it's essential, but that's the way it's looking now.
Um, well, just offhand, to place it at a time when the temple is being built and it's the temple that's in the town itself, that
No.
could be very that I know you're not saying that, but that
Okay.
could be good. Like
Okay.
like
Okay.
there's something you're already doing in this piece that really works is that you have the characters doing things.
Right.
And this is something that all of us writers can learn from, and something that I try to say a lot so that I'll hear it myself is that we do a lot better with our characterization when we have our characters engaged in actions, because actions display characters, and so therefore it's pretty nice to have our characters actually engaged in something. when when Ernest Hemingway wants to write about a father and son, he doesn't have them sitting at a dinner table and talking. He has them out on the ocean deep sea fishing. Like
Right.
it just helps. So if you're just starting to think about this, and for all of us, I mean, the value of doing something like this workshop is to look at other people's work and take it into yourself and try and take lessons away from it and say, "Oh, I see. This works. That makes sense." And it saves us a lot of time. We might, I mean, if I could have back and the time that I've spent writing static dinner scenes in which nothing was going on except for characters talking, I mean, I would have a lot of time left on my plate, you know? Um, so yeah, I mean, you're starting a novel, you know, you're going to be involved in it for a while, um, doing some thinking about what works better and what doesn't, so that you don't kind of leave yourself stranded. I mean, that's what we end up doing is we leave ourselves stranded with our characters not doing anything. So much better to get our characters involved in needing to get from A to B. They have to go over the mountains. They have to, they're, you know, the father is a craftsman building the temple and he wants to bring his son into doing his craftsmanship, but the son doesn't want to do that. He wants to travel and see the world. We already have the start of a story, right? It's
Right.
so easy that way once we have these things that are going on, you know. And then you have the father, like, not everyone can do this kind of scroll work. You take, and then you get to do the stuff that I love to do. Don't do too much of it, but I love to do research, you know. I research about physical things that people do. That's, you know, it just fascinates us as writers, I think. So um okay, well, all of that is
Thank you. I
interesting.
remember that.
Yeah. Um, all of that's fascinating. Let's have you read a little bit of this as we start off here. So you see the yellow lines on my screen?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, between there, and then I'm going to have you read the dialogue between the boy and the girl.
Okay. Great. Swaminathan always started his day just right. Not for him the early morning dreaming and carrying on the woven grass mat like his brothers did, waiting for a sharp admonition from their father. No, Swaminathan had greater, more purposeful mornings. With single minded dedication, he rose earlier than everyone, at least an hour before sunrise, when streaks of darkness still lingered in protest. But this morning, the light in the courtyard seemed brighter than usual. Was it already sunrise? Was he late? No, his day would be ruined. He rushed through his routine, quickly washing his face at the backyard well, smearing his forehead with a vibhuti ash, chanting Om Namah Shivaya under his breath automatically. He then picked up his manuscript leaves and walked out to the veranda, looking up and down Sannidhi Street as nonchalantly as he could. Sannidhi Street was a short, sandy street of 10 row houses, starting at the main road and ending in a surprisingly large temple. The entrance to every house was marked on the ground with large column designs. Hand drawn with loving care and rice powder, the column was the pride of the women of the street. If waking up early was a virtue, watering the front of the house and drawing the column was the observable social test of that virtue. Everyone participated in the challenge, except, of course, number 3. Sorry, Otis, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh,
Is there
oh yeah,
something
that's
wrong
me.
with my...
No, that was me. Me. I did it. Um, maybe tell us a little bit here. I think the girl comes out of the temple and then she comes and
So she goes to the
um,
temple to draw water. Everybody goes to the temple well to draw drinking water. And then she
mhm.
comes out and she's supposed to draw the column for both her house as well as Swaminathan's house, because there's a backstory that I'm not saying here, that his mom is not very active, and therefore, you know, the neighbors pitch in and do a lot of her work. And
Okay.
so this girl has offered to do the column for their house for a long time. So she basically takes care of the column for their house. And that's basically why he hangs out in the morning, you know, sort of waiting for her to do that every morning.
Yeah, 10th century or modern day, it's
It's the
always been
same
the same.
story.
It's the same. It's always been the same.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, read this ending part then.
So Abhyam now picked up her pot and walked over next door to number 3. Swaminathan was absorbed in his manuscript. Lucky Sama to be able to study all he wanted. She started sprinkling water. Hey, look where you splashed. Sama could be a real grump in the morning. Maybe you should go inside with your precious palm leaves while the rest of us are working here, she spluttered. And maybe you should bend a bit more like a lady when you sprinkle water. Stop yapping and bring over the kavi box, Sama. Ah, came without your kavi box, Abhikuti. Day, Sama, how many times have I told you not to call me Abhikuti? Ah, so much taller now, not so kutti anymore, Abhikuti. Sama, you want to die? I'm telling you, one of these days, you will die at my hands. Abhyam rang a loud admonition from next door. It was her mother. Don't you know how to talk? Such auspicious talk so early in the morning? Besh, besh, very good. Her sarcasm cut through the thin morning fog. Abhyam bit her lip. Swaminathan mentally kicked himself. He should have kept his voice down. He hated it when Abhyam's mother gave her a tough time, which was most of the time.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's so much fun. Um, I personally, I love foreign language because I love languages. I mean, if I love English, using English, then I love all languages. It's like, so I love the foreign language in there. I love the sounds of them. Um, I love how they tease each other, and it's just so it's so knowable to all of us, to feel that tension. Um, so you're uh, you're starting. How far into the process are you with this novel?
I mean, this is, I have written a bit more. I have written a few pages more, but that's about the concrete work I have. The rest is all planning and plotting and random notes and like just stuff in my head. It's just a few pages more than this. That's all.
Hmm. Um, so I mean, there's you know like my job, like you're writing the book, and so my job is definitely not to get in the way of that. So the most important thing, it seems to me, if you're working on a novel, is to get into a regular schedule, to know what you're doing. Doing that plotting work can be really great, the developmental work, so that you're preparing yourself. And then I don't know what you're doing for time, but I know I'm process is basically everything for us. I mean, we can talk a blue streak about how to write. If we're not going and sitting down and writing every day, we're not going to get any writing done.
Please tell
I
me
mean,
about it, Otis. I'm being so random. This has been like on the burner for more than a year now. For many years, of course, like all stories are, but actively for a year now, but I haven't done much about it. So I hope 2022 does the magic. I have signed up for all these nano remo and things like that, but never worked. But I really hope this time it works.
okay, there's no magic. That's the thing I'm going to tell you. There's no magic at all. But it might feel like magic if if you engage in it. The thing that worked for me when I was stuck with my first novel and I was feeling so much pressure to get something done and get something to agents and take advantage of everything that I could take advantage of, like everyone told me, um, was simply to write every single day. So that's a little bit easier said than done. My rule, this process, I mean, all of you might be like, well, talk about the book or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like, I truly do liken this to like yoga. We could sit here and talk about doing yoga all day long. If we don't do it, we're not going to get any of the benefits from it. Right? I mean, we can talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, you know that one where you do that, and oh yeah, and you really have to keep your arms straight. Oh yeah, I know. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. The only meaning we have as writers is when we sit down in front of the keyboard and, I would say even type, but I wouldn't even say that. We have to sit there with the book, right? Even if we don't do anything. Flannery O'Connor said, every morning I sit down at the typewriter, so if something happens, I'm there to see it. That is the way of the writer. I really truly believe it. We are a conduit. It is not us. It is not our ego. I had a I had a mentor when I was in a writing program, and he asked me, why I wanted to write, and I was talking about this and that. I think I was gonna be giving, being interviewed, and it was really gonna be great. And he said, "It sounds like you want to have written." And I learned from that. I learned from that. Writers write. We can put that up on our computer. Writers write. You want to be a writer, you better be writing. Do not go out there and say you're a writer if you're not writing, right? And don't let anyone tell you you're not a writer if they say, "Well, what have you published?" No, writers write. That's our job. So, sitting down every day, I say sit down for 5 minutes a day, and I say that purposefully so that, because it can be hard. We can say, what we say to ourselves is, "I don't have time to do it today." No, that's not okay. We have time. We have 5 minutes to sit down, and we want to do it every day. I personally, it's funny, I was just thinking about this. I have a good friend, Adam Johnson. He's a wonderful, amazing writer. He writes at night. I do not understand that at all. I don't. I can't comprehend it. You know, he he has a Pulitzer Prize, so I guess I have to accept that it works, but I write in the morning. I write in the morning because at night I think about what I want to write about. I actually grind my coffee for the morning. I have a little ritual. I wake up in the morning, I have a little ritual, and my little ritual does not include, I don't even have Facebook anymore. I dropped it totally, but it doesn't include reading emails. It doesn't include looking at the news. It doesn't include talking to anyone. At this point, I can do some of those things, but at first, no. And then, so ritual at night, sleep, doesn't matter how tired I am, ritual in the morning, sit down at my desk, and then I write. And I do it every single day. And it's basically, it becomes obviously a habit. We know a lot about the brain and how the brain works, that we create essentially a struggle and reward pairing. So we, but I don't like to struggle that much, of course, so I like to make it as easy as possible. I indulge myself. I mean, and then you sit down, you do your work, and then if you have trouble sitting down for a while, just make it 5 minutes. Make sure you go, "Yes, I did it." You can do everything else in your day after that. Go ahead. Until you establish the routine, just make sure that you congratulate yourself for your work. The second part of it is you have to carve out the time. This is true for all of us writers. We're not alone in the world. We have relationships with other people. We have to let those other people know that our work is important to us, you know, but it doesn't mean that we don't love them. They become worried that we don't love them. So we have to make sure that they feel loved and can hold the fact that we have something else that we want to do some of the time. This is very hard in our lives as writers, but we have to do that. Then, and we also have to recognize that one of the issues for us as writers, is that we want also to be necessary for other people all the time. We want to feel like we have a purpose in that we solve everyone's problems. We have to be okay with not solving other people's problems some of the time. I don't know if that is you at all, but I know it speaks to me. It speaks to most of us. And this is one of the big problems with us trying to get that time to write. We say we want to write, but then our kid comes to us, our spouse, our loved one, our aunt. They say, "I can't work the washer. I can't do this." And you're like, "Okay, I'll do it." Right? We can't do that. We have to say, "That sounds very hard for you. I'm sorry. I'll be able to be there in an hour. Right now I'm writing." For the first week, month, year, 2 years, this is very difficult. Okay, it's very difficult. It requires a lot. And if you don't do it, you're not gonna write your book. You're not going to. You have to be able to say, no, I can't do it now. Please don't bother me now. And I still love you. It's going to be okay. Over time, you realize, and all your loved ones realize, it will be okay. The second thing you have to do is you have to sit down and write every morning, right? You also have to stop. And that might seem crazy to you right now, but I'm just saying you do have to stop, because if you let the rest of your world get out of control, if you don't take care of those things and you don't take care of yourself, um, you won't be able to write. It reminds me, like, when I boxed, right? When I boxed, let's say I would be out someplace, in a bar, and someone would be like, "Hey, who you looking at? You want to fight?" I was like, "I don't want to fight you. I got to fight tomorrow. I don't want to blow it. What if you hurt me? Then I won't be able to fight tomorrow. No way, no way. What? Here, have a beer. Have a beer. Have two, please, please. I have no, right? we we need to take care of all of that stuff. We need to pay our bills. We need to do our jobs. We need to do all of that stuff, because if we don't, then we're gonna have trouble here during this period. It's like a it's like that sanctuary space. I'm, you know, so that's my big process advice. It's
Thank you.
it it really starts, and I really believe in creating the ritual. Decide if you're better to carve out that time at night or the morning. I don't think it happens during the day, but maybe. I can't have other things in my mind. Um, a couple of things about this work. Let me just say, the if I look at this opening, there's an omniscient narrator who is very subjective. Do you understand what I mean when I say a character that it's a subjective voice as opposed to an objective voice?
Yes.
I would recommend, so like here we have, even in the very beginning, not for him to do the early, let's see, where is he? Is this the beginning? He basically says something about the narrator is talking about the sun is, sort of personified, anthropomorphized. And I would suggest that your narrator, that you try to create a separation between your narrator who's telling us about things and make them objective. Don't have them have a subjective voice. That's very helpful. If they're subjective, the reader wonders, who are they? Because subjectivity is something that human beings do, right? And I think you'll be better off. It's not that the when we write an objective narrator, they disappear basically. The reader doesn't notice them. And that's very useful for us because it focuses our attention on the characters in the novel rather than on the narrator.
Got it.
But I say that with a little bit of, I'm a little bit like this on it, because if it's the way you hear the story, it might be what you have to do for the first draft, and then probably fix it and tone it down. Um, but for me, what I like to do, because it creates a contrast, stories are all about contrast. So we have an objective narrator, and then in this objective world that we see characters who are subjective in certain ways. That differentiates them as characters. So your main character, this boy, might see the sun as cruel, for example, or in a hurry, or whatever subjective feeling he has. We associate that with his character, and it makes his character more pronounced, right? The
Right.
girl sees things differently. So in this way, we have characters that see the world differently, and that is like life. But when we have this narrator that's subjective and then covers all the characters with that subjectivity, then everything is sort of vaguely the same. And we do not want things to be the same in our novel. We need to have contrasts in order for the reader to perceive what's happening. Does that make sense?
Got it. Got it. Got it. I
Yeah.
just have a
So,
question here.
Yeah.
I was, to my mind, in the first few lines, it starts out being, a third person omniscient narrator. But then suddenly in my mind, it switched to the voice in Swaminathan's head when it says, was it already sunrise? Was he late? It seemed like, these were questions that he was having in his head. So how does one do that when you're talking about, uh, can this pass off as a first person in his head?
Um, I I don't do that because um um I understand it in terms of the creative process. That's what I meant. I do understand what's going on here in terms of the creative process and that kind of happens, but it's indistinct and it's hard for me to recognize.
Got it.
I'm
Got
I'm sort of, I'm a little bit lost. So what I
got it.
do is I I make things very distinct to help myself because writing a novel is a long process. So um, I try and make sure that I know what I'm doing when I'm doing it because the danger is I don't know what I'm doing when I'm doing it, and that's quite common. Okay, it's quite common. So I try to have because the creative process is a very fluid process. It's the muse are speaking to us, whatever it is, we don't really know. It's a very fluid process. So I try to add a little bit so I have some control over it. Otherwise, it's just really a big mess, right? It's just me engaging in the voices in my head and my imagination, and that's in my experience that can be a little bit of trouble, you know. It's a little bit formless. It's me enjoying the voices and the muse and not me constructing the story a little bit. So I do try. So I would write a paragraph, an introductory paragraph that's objective, and then I would move the point of view into our main character's head, and then
Got it.
I would do it purposefully. I
Got
wouldn't
it.
make it kind of a
This
um,
flows into this simple bracket. Right. Got it. Thank you.
and I'll just say the other thing, the big you'll excuse my language for a minute, but like this is uh, the big uh, the big advice for a novel is to write the shitty first draft. That's what we call it. We don't worry about it. We don't sweat it. We don't overwork it. Just get it done. And I am going to say, all the thinking aside, getting that first draft done from A to B, whatever it is, 200, 240, 600 pages, whatever it is a huge boost because that then right now when you're writing a first draft, yes, just go experiment, work, don't worry about it too much. A little bit if you can, but if you can't, don't let it interfere with your process. The most important thing is sitting down every day. When the shitty first draft is done, then your mind is released from the burden of having to write that first draft. Now you can look at everything. And you can look at it more objectively too, and you can come up with some ideas, and then you can start to shape it in the way that you want. Um, I think we better move on, but it's a be careful. Okay, so I've been in a lot of workshops, and there's when you're in the workshop and people say this is ambitious, they mean that they think you're going to fail and that you can't do it. It's your first novel. Right now, it seems ambitious. You're talking, you have a lot that you're doing. It sounds ambitious, I'm telling you. Um, keep it simple. Keep it simple. I mean, you have, you could even think about, the situation with the column here and this love story is so great. And also the way you write is quite dense. I could see it being a wonderful, dense short story. If you could, a short story is like a novel, is like a poem. They're all the same. It's basically you have an arc of character and it's like an accordion, how big you make it. But I could see a wonderful short story in this environment also. And that's, a novel is, well, I don't even want to tell you how long a novel can take. I know that it can take a long time. Or, people say 2 years. I'm like, 2 years? Oh, God, what I would give for a 2-year novel. Um, a short story,
Okay.
a short story can take you, honestly, some of my first ones, 6 months. So, I mean, I work hard on my work, we work hard. So you have a great environment. For all of us, and this is, something like many of the pieces in Indic that I read, I want more of this, like I would like to see more of this, like this really unique environment plus a story, right? And you have that here. You have this really unique environment, you have this really unique process, and you have a story. This budding love story that's going on here, this sort of contentious relationship. That's great. So you can do a lot with that, of course.
Thank you.
But sit down every day. We'll check in next week to see how you did.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good inspiration. Thank you, Otis. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Madhavi, should we take a look at your
Hi,
piece?
Otis.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great. Um, maybe we can. Did I tell everyone my whole family got COVID last week? Wow, but it's that Omicron. That wasn't so bad, but
It shows milder
Wow.
symptoms, but a prolonged effect. I hope you
yeah,
get better
yeah,
soon, all of you.
yeah. Everyone else seems to be getting better. I just had this sort of little lingering thing still, but I just don't feel 100%. So it keeps me kind of still resting, and I don't know. It's not.
We
I've been
struggled with
doing.
Omicron for around 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks? Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm in about a week at this point.
Hope
But
you
it's
get better soon.
amazing when I was feeling so well before that. I mean, I couldn't believe how well I was feeling. I mean, with kids, you're sick all the time basically, but I was totally well.
True.
Not anymore. Let's have you read this first page, and then you can tell us a little bit of what's
Ah,
happening.
okay. Abhi rocketed up the stairs, taking 2 stairs at a time. He almost bumped into Atul, his younger cousin, but Atul managed to dodge him in time, and a great tragedy was successfully averted. Bhanu, the house help, noticed Abir coming up the stairs from the corridor on the first floor and duly got rid of his dusting cloth. He hastily picked up the glass of water that he had kept on the side table. Bhanu knew what time Abir usually got back and was always ready to receive him with water and a pleasant smile on his face. Abir had always been a free-spirited guy who went with the flow. His commitment to his NGO took him to the remote corners of the country, and at times he would not be back home for months. But for the last 3 months, Abir's timings were pretty consistent. The wanderer never wandered far off and dutifully returned home as the clock struck 6 every evening. He had become so punctual that it had become a joke for the entire household. His grandfather said that one could set the clock with his arrival. Whatever time Abir left home, he was bound to return at 6 p.m. Bhanu intercepted Abir at the top of the stairs, who in turn just flung his backpack at Bhanu and breezed past him. Shall I
Okay,
continue?
great. No, no, that's great. Though I'm enjoying the reading very much.
Thank
Um,
you.
tell us a little bit about what you have in mind for this story.
I've started a new story, basically. It's about two people, Abir and Arya. And the setting is a typical Indian household where they are having a live-in relationship. She is staying with his family. They're about to get married in 3 days and they have a history. So basically, I'm trying to explore this concept of a live-in relationship in a what do you say, a big Indian family. Then there are two stories running parallel, uh, concentrating on Abir and Arya only. But one is their past and one is actual present where they're getting married. All the big fat Indian wedding rituals would be there. And with each ritual, there will be a corresponding flashback. So since I was trying to explore the flashback in the earlier story, I thought of getting into this one. And that's how it will progress. So this is an introductory chapter for them where they're sort of together and she is supposed to leave that day to her parents' house. And whatever transpires later.
Okay. Okay.
Starting from that point and going back and forth.
So they have a relationship. They're not married, but they are living together in a large
Yeah.
Indian household.
Yeah. And how the family comes to accept it will be addressed in the later chapters.
Right. So we might imagine that some of the members of the household have different feelings about this. Is that
Yes.
would that be true?
Yeah.
So like there might be some conservative elements in the family that are like this newfangled thing, is like
Yes.
not right. And okay. Okay, I got it. The two lines of story. So Madhavi, I think we have to have a talk about flashback. I don't know what you've taken from what I've said before, but let me I had when I was at Stanford, I had a wonderful teacher named John LaRue, and he's passed on to the other side, but he's a revered elder to me. And one day I was frustrated and I felt like I was learning nothing and I didn't, my career wasn't going the way I wanted it to go. And so I grabbed John LaRue and I threw him against the wall because that's what we do with elders here in the United States. And I said, tell me something I can really use. And he said, only write flashbacks if you absolutely have to.
Yeah. Told me that last time also.
So I did tell you that. Okay. And then your response is then to work on a whole story that's filled all automatically with flashbacks. So you could wonder. You could wonder what's happening here.
I want
I
to.
might feel like the revered elder who's being grabbed and thrown up against the door.
I basically want to put them in two different situations. So that's why I was thinking of doing this.
The thing that I found with flashbacks. So what I take from John LaRue, and I really believe this, that he's saying that okay, when you start a story, you grab the reader and you put them somewhere, right? You locate them, usually in a point of view, in a space and time, right? Space, time, and person usually, and perspective. And sometimes you have those dual perspectives. You have that objective narrator perspective, and you have the subjective perspective of the point of view character. So you do that, and right then and there at the beginning of your story, you have what's called the willing suspension of disbelief. So the reader is ready to go. They've already told you that because they opened your book. We don't have control over them before they open your book, but once they open their book, then you grab them by the throat and you don't let them go. That's the rule. Once you've done that, momentum is your friend. Momentum is your friend. You do not want them to put down the book. That means we start running and we don't stop, basically. Unless we have the reader over the edge of a cliff. Over the edge of a cliff. Right?
Yeah.
There's a correspond well, I don't want to get too much into it, but there's a corresponding issue with how much they want to know what's going to happen exactly right then and how much flashback they will tolerate. Right? You have to create a sense of power going this way that you arrest, and it's only however much that is how much flashback you can have. So if it's just like none, if there's no momentum, then you can't have any flashback. If there's a lot of momentum, right, and they just have to know, is that frog going to be a prince? That's when you can stop it, right? And then you can have some flashback. Um, it's something to think about. But the other thing is, whatever's in the flashback, I have found over a long period of time, you can take that and put it into the story. It doesn't need to be a flashback. You just have to be smart about how to do it. That's where we really become writers. When we start realizing that the first thing that we think of as the way to do it, we've probably thought of it as the first thing because it's the easiest thing. It's the one that requires the least amount of creative work from us. But there's probably another way, and this is where we have to start doing our thinking, right? Oh, in their flashback, they had an argument, but now, and you want to make sure you have that argument in the flashback because it's going to be important in the story in the front. Well, why not take that argument and put it into the front story?
Mhm.
Right? I'm just bringing it up because I will anticipate the problem because I've seen it so many times of writing something that ends up having a flashback. It's not that you can't do it, or sometimes what people do is they alternate between the two so that you basically have two stories in a patterned way that are
That's what
working
I was
simultaneously.
trying to do actually.
Yeah. And I should go ahead and say I've successfully done that. So it can be done. What you do there is you're basically creating what's an A story and a B story that are running parallel to each other. But they both have to engage,
Yeah.
like just in the same way that you engage the reader in the beginning here, then you have to engage the reader in the same way here. And once you establish the pattern, you have to continue it. So that creates a commitment. You can't, it's not just willy-nilly because you want to do it. You have to A, B, A, B, A, B. And in a sense, both of those stories have to arc to the ending. Anyway, big speech, but something to think about. I mean, it's really hard to get a story to start and engage that reader and grab them and hold them to the end. That's hard. Now it's harder to do it for two stories, right? It's like we're we're trying to be, particularly as we're developing our chops, as we're developing ourselves as writers. I still do this. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. You don't have to do something so complex, right? You want to write your first story. You want to publish your first story. You want to engage a reader and show that you can hang on to them the entire time for 10 pages. Or maybe it's longer, or for a novel or something like that. You're trying to write, your first published work that's going to grab somebody. Keep it simple. Don't make it too hard on yourself. It's already kind of hard. There's already so much we have to work on. Anyway, I throw that out there to think about a little bit. I like this idea. I think that it's a really great idea that you have this the central idea of having this kind of this live-in couple, basically unmarried, in this larger Indian household. I am going to say right now, I have never seen that before. I've not seen that depicted in any story. I had not even imagined that that might be the case, right? Before.
It's
So it's a
usually
brand
not the
new,
case. Yeah.
yeah. So it's a brand new world, and that's great. That is really, really good material. I want to, this is for everyone here. Before, when I was talking to Deepa, I was saying that one of the things that I really liked about her piece, I didn't actually perceive that place as being in the 10th century. I perceived it as being, modern and traditional. But I really liked that I was involved in a world that I hadn't seen before, and I was getting the details of that world. So that is Ezra Pound, who ended up being a fascist, but anyway, Ezra Pound said, make it new, right? Make it new. It's a really great phrase for us to remember that we don't invent stories. Stories have been around for a long time, but we make them new. So in Deepa's story, she's showing me something, in this traditional society, making these columns on the way to the temple I've never seen before. I love that because I want to read things that are new. The thing that you know about me and all of your readers is that we want to escape our own life and go into another life, right? I don't want to be here at my house and doing the dishes and all the things I have to do here. I want to go into your world. I'm telling you that. So, regardless of, that obviously with the column and the traditional society, that's really unique. But it doesn't matter what world we're writing about, we have to make it unique. This world right here, as I'm reading the first page, I have no idea what it's like. I'm not going into the world. All I have is Abir rocketed up the stairs. They could be any kind of stairs. Abir could be any kind of person. I actually thought he was just a little boy based on the way he was behaving, right?
I also
I noticed that
realized
he
it
has,
later when I saw your comments. Maybe
yeah,
that
I
should
was
have
just
come
like,
later.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to, one of the things here is you stay very close. Well, actually, you move into the point of view of Banu here for actually a lot of this piece. So I wouldn't do that if he's not a major character, right? I would stay in the point of view of your major character because like the start of a story, once you draw the reader into a character, if you take them out of there and put them into a new character, you have all your same problems again. But the main point I'm making is you want to be able to use this. I said to Deepa, to have an objective, omniscient, what we actually call them is a limited omniscient narrator. And they're limited in that they don't think about the entire nature of the universe. They focus their attention on a specific place. Limited omniscient in third person. So they are basically focused on Abir. Being focused on Abir, their omniscience allows them to both tell us about Abir, tell us about the stairs, tell us about this house, tell us all these things, but then also go into Abir's mind. That's the omniscience. And then come out again. When they're out of Abir's mind, I think that they would be objective, right? But when they go into Abir's mind, they can give us Abir's subjective interpretation of the world, right? He smelled the coffee with chicory. It reminded him of his childhood. I'll have a cup, he said, right? So we can move into the mind and then we can move out to give the objective information of the world. So I do want some of that objective information, and it can be hard for us as writers. I don't know if you know this world well or not, but when we know a world well, it can be hard for us to draw out the unique aspects of it for our reader because we take them for granted, right? When we write that traditional society, like that Deepa is writing about, it's not hard for us to bring it out because we're foreign in that world too. And we are looking at it and we're amazed by these details. We're amazed by all these things. But when it's a world that we know and we're using that as the world of our story, it can be very hard because we're used to it. We're like, this is everyday stuff. So we have to work as writers to see what's unique in the world that I know. That's where the writer starts perceiving details. This is the work of the writer. Madhavi, you can go through your day. It's not you writing a story necessarily, but you have a little notebook, like this is like the stereotype of us writers, right? We're there with little notebooks all the time, just jotting things down. Oh, look at look at the way the curtain flutters, when the blah da 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 only in the easterly breeze, right? Okay, that's a little detail. Now I'm going to put that in my work, right? We want to start becoming that stereotype of the writer who's perceiving all of these unique details in the world, even if it's a world that's very common to us, because we can never, everybody, me, all of us, listen to me. We can never write a common world, right? Because the common world is exactly what our reader wants to escape, right? I already live in a common world. I want to go to an uncommon world. So we must make it uncommon. The and a little bit of consideration here, when I see these two characters get together, they are sort of blissfully, idyllically and romantically sort of together. It makes me expect that things are going to go bad, okay? Because this is a story. Or usually the way it happens is, there's a moment of this, like, it's, the couple get together and there's like, and then immediately it goes bad. Okay. Is that right? So it's like, because it's a story. Stories are about characters not getting what they want. It's not about characters getting what they want. And the other thing is that when things are idealized, it doesn't exactly jive with the reader's experience. And then they begin to think that the world that they're in is not real, right? Because we all know that our relationships are difficult and they go back and forth and there's a lot of things going on. They're not as idyllic. So I don't know where you're going to go, but I just wanted you to be aware that there's certain things that the reader does come in sort of anticipating, because not even consciously, subconsciously, basically, because we're so used to stories, right? So you probably already have that embedded here, but
I actually want to concentrate on how things were not good and how everybody else is trying to make it better for them, like that. So whether they get it or they don't is the question. But
that's interesting.
Yeah. So how things go bad, we focus on that, and how everybody's trying to set it right for them.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Well, right now I'm a little bit, I think I'm a little bit swayed by, Abir, he's rushing home because he's rushing home to like heaven.
He never used to come home. That's why I wanted to insert that somewhere, that till 3 months ago, he never used to get back home for months. And now he doesn't go anywhere. Wherever he is, he makes it a point to come back home because of her. So how she comes to live with him, that's the story. Why they couldn't be together is the story B.
Okay. Well, sometimes when you feel like the story is, think about it, because sometimes when we have a backstory that is so important to us, maybe that's the story we should be telling. But I see or you could tell two stories. Or go for it. You keep going, Madhavi. You keep going.
Maybe I'll try 1 or 2 chapters more, and then we can decide which way we should,
Okay, but definitely get us into this house as a unique place.
Yeah, I changed the beginning.
That is probably
do that.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing, and try and handle that writing a little bit in terms of the objective, limited, omniscient narrator, and then going into the point of view. That as a skill is very worth developing because it's going to be useful for you forever, not just in this story, but every story you write, afterwards. Well, I better move on because I know Abraham starts to
Thank you so
get
much.
antsy. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Otis, how did you guess?
I saw your blank screen and there was something coming from it. Sri Tran, let's talk about this story.
Hey, hi, Otis.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for asking.
So before you begin with the Sricharan's piece, Otis, one thing that I wanted to ask you, and basically just for the benefit of everyone also, that in a couple of places you had highlighted the POV issues, and you have talked about this head hopping several times, and why changing POVs leads to these problems. I'm wondering, and we talked about this, that when we come up with this new process of submissions and all, there will be some reading material also for people that you'll provide that they can read through for the basics of these writing. But in is there anything that you want to maybe perhaps just repeat for the benefit of everyone? Because I know the POV is something that I keep seeing consistently in the pieces that are submitted, including mine, where the POV jumps or whether it is accidental or just happens that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, I I guess I'm making an argument, in a sense. I'm making an argument that when the reader has an experience that has a feeling of consistency, that's better for the reader than reading words that are inconsistent. And basically what happens is when we're writing words, the reader's reading them and they basically go along with whatever those words are. So if the words are situated above the scene and sort of describing the mountains in the distance, then we are behind those words, basically seeing the mountains that way. If the words are I have Edgar here. Edgar looked at his friend and looked back at his coffee. He picked it up, sipped it. It was da 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 da. I am now in the head of Edgar, right? So where the reader is seeing the story is taking place no matter what. My argument is that when we take the reader and we put them someplace and we make it consistent, that the reader becomes more comfortable and understands the circumstance better. Basically because let's say I'm advocating for a single point of view. Not that we have to have a single point of view. I'll talk about multiple points of view in a second. But if we have a single point of view, having a single point of view is just the way that we live our own lives. We live our lives with a single point of view. So it's understandable to us. When we write this thing that moves all over the place, that's a world that the reader has never experienced in their life, and it makes them confused and uncomfortable psychologically.
So when you talk about...
Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about the fact that we live our lives from a single point of view, that is essentially the first person point of view that you're talking about, right? When we look at someone, we can only try and discern their emotions or what they might be thinking from their reactions. We don't have access to their minds as to figure out what they're thinking. But on the other hand, when you talk about the omniscient narrator's point of view, that point of view gives the freedom to get into anyone's head. But even there, there are certain rules, right?
Well, that's why I would always call it limited omniscience because it's not omniscience. Omniscience is the mind of a supreme being that knows all time, all things, right? Omniscient. It knows everything. So we're not doing that at all. We're engaged in limited omniscience. So I would advocate for having a limited omniscient narrator if you're in third person, right? So if you're in third person, that means you have a limited omniscient narrator already. There's someone who's accessing, I'm going to use Edgar as the name again. So there's someone who's accessing Edgar. They can access Edgar or they could do something else, but they're being restricted in what they're able to do. Yes, in third person, they could jump into Jane. So we could have Edgar and Jane. Now we have multiple points of view. If we do it so that there's a pattern to it that's consistent so that the reader is prepared and ready and that they understand. My simple rule is that we basically, there's two things that we want to avoid in our work for the reader. We do not want the reader to be confused. That's bad. We do not want the reader to be bored. Those are the two things we must not have in our work. Having a point of view that goes all over the place has the danger of being confusing. Confusing means it's also not engaging, basically. So having something consistent creates a world that the reader can engage with more so because they feel comfortable. It's also what I sometimes call locating the reader. We want to locate the reader so that the reader feels comfortable. When something happens that's out of point of view, suddenly they're like, they don't understand it because something's happening to them psychologically, where they're like,
Right.
how do I know what's happening behind that corner when I'm standing here? How do
Got
I
it. Got
know
it.
how do I know what Uncle Benny is thinking when I'm this character? I don't. That doesn't make sense to me. So now we're losing them. And that's the main thing. We do not want to lose our reader. If we confuse them or we bore them, we have the danger of losing them.
Got it. Thanks. Thanks,
So
Otis.
it's it's actually one of the easiest things we can fix. But we don't fix it unless we try to. Um, but fixing it will improve our work a lot. We're still going to have the issue, whether we use point of view well or not, we still have the issue of telling a story that's going to be interesting and engaging and have the central character move through a series of events on an emotional roller coaster and end up somewhere in a state of transformation, right? We still have that issue. That's what we have. That's what we're shooting for. Point of view is just our, that's just our craft. But it is very easy for us to fix that. Once that's fixed, then it's sometimes much easier to see, well, do we have a story now? But before that level, it can be kind of tough. Sri Charan, let's look at this. So maybe read
Okay.
read this opening for us.
Yeah. Edgar Eagle was at the river bathing with his friends when his father sent Fat Lynn to fetch him home. Immediately was the word Fat Lynn repeated after every sentence. He had forgotten about loading corn to the town. Edgar got out of the river, his softened black hair dribbling tiny drops as river grass streaked his copper screen green. Water splashed behind him as his friends played King's Court, their voice accusing each other of mock tests. I should be the one playing king, he thought. A leech clung to his thigh, but he pulled it out when it began to tickle him. Rough brown sand pricked at his feet as he made his way to the great birch tree, stooping a few yards away from the water. Old Monk, the villagers named it. On the other bank, the sun was almost shaking off the last remnants of darkness away behind the green woods. Dawn was the best time for baths in the river Greensneak. Edgar and his friends had kept their clothes on the branches of the old monk. His rough grey cotton tunic and brown trousers hung from the highest branch. He had climbed that branch long ago, and no one threatened to rob him of that branch. Others could not simply reach it. Yet. Good Sir Eagle asked me to bring you immediately, Lincott muttered again. Yeah, Otis. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I laughed because I was engaged in
Okay.
looking at this line and thinking about things. Thank you, Shritron. So tell us a little bit about this piece. What are you thinking of with it?
Yeah, so I am also planning a novel with this background. So this is some historical, but set in another world, like it's fictional world. So it has some gods and all the stuff. So in the story, Edgar's father has a job of getting the corn to the town for selling them, but there are some mishaps happening, and eventually he sells himself into slavery, and Edgar was sent to bring money for releasing them. That happens
Okay.
eventually, but it does not yet.
Um, One thing I was wondering with this piece was I was having the most difficulty with was sort of like trying to suss out what culture exactly this was. It was like, it started with Edgar Eagle Claw, which sounds like an indigenous name in the United States to me. Then Fat Lin. We have Old Monk and a number of other things. So I was curious, like where, what's the center of this piece? Like, what are you imagining of this world? Like, what environment is this?
Yeah, uh, this was not in India, like uh, with Indian setting there, like either European or Indian. So these ducks there, right? These have Indian elements because in our villages we have seen ducks and all these things.
Right. So it feels like it's kind of like a morph of like some kind of Chaucer like, you know, Old English,
Oh,
like
yeah,
like so,
it's not a modern world. Like it's really the ancient world. Yeah,
uh-huh.
it's a medieval setting.
Um, okay. Yeah. I think I probably would try to push you a little bit to it because like there are things where you're you're writing out of an Indian culture, and so like your Indian culture,
Mm.
right, comes into this sort of weirdly morphed Anglo-Saxon fantasy culture too, and like they end up creating some
Mm.
and other things are being drawn upon they that can feel to me a little bit cliche. It's as if you're writing this world out of your
Mm.
readings about fantasy worlds or your readings about the sort of standard, to some degree, your standard cliches about the about a fantasy medieval world of this type, Anglo-Saxon-ish fantasy world of this type.
Mm.
But then also working into that, of course, is your own consciousness and your own culture. And so it becomes a kind of confusing to me. There, excuse me. Um, there is there's the old adage in writing, write what you know. Um, so we can just kind of take that in. I'm not 100% a believer of that because I believe as writers, we should be able to write about whatever we want to write about. So I actually do believe that. But I do understand the idea that we must know what we write about.
Mm.
It's easier for us, of course, to write about what we already know. We could get into an argument about do we really know anything and what does it mean to know something, but we're not going to go there right now. I think we always have more work to do to even understand what it is that we do know, to understand our world, to understand anything about our world. That's a constant process that we're engaged in as writers. But I think we should feel it as a mandate that we must know what we're writing about finally. So in this, where it becomes confusing, and I like the imaginative world that you have here, but I don't think you haven't done the work to center yourself in terms of what
Mm.
it is that you're writing about. You know, Yeah, it's sort of like you're just exploring it um, as you're going along,
Hmm.
which is a way that we work. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. We write this. The thing for us is we want to write, we want to write that first draft, and then we look at it, and then once we've got that first draft, then we say, oh, okay, how about this? If it were me and I were you, if it were me and I were you, I would say, okay, this is a good first draft, and I have it take place in this kind of weird Anglo, fantasy world, Anglo-Saxon-ish fantasy world that I don't really even know. And if I do know it, I only know it from the cliches of reading about it.
Hmm.
How can I make it a little bit more, mine? What can I do to it? Is there, can I pick a specific place that I know? I love research. Can I place this? Yeah, I asked Deepa if that was a real town. I would go to that town, right? I would go to that town. I would sit there. I would try and imagine the life there in the 10th century. I would go to the museums. I want to take in as much as I can in order to aid my imagination. I would think of this place and say, where is this place in reality? We have a problem as writers that we have this incredibly flexible tool that we use, words. We can pick any word at any time and write it down. This is no problem whatsoever. It takes nothing to do it. So we need to have things that structure us and restrict us. This goes back to Abhinav and point of view too. One of the reasons we have limited omniscience is because we as writers are omniscient. We can write any word we want from anywhere in the world we want. So how do we start to limit it and focus the world, right?
Hmm.
So, but it was interesting, Shri Tran. I knew I was going to talk about this, but then I looked at just this one little line. So I love this. So Edgar got out, water splashed behind him, and his friends played King's Court. Like that was a game that I imagined that you might have played with your friends, right? And their voices accusing each other of mock thefts. I would love to hear this, and see these kids playing this game. He thought, by the way, everyone, just go ahead and do a search for ly. If it's an adverb, strike it from your manuscript. You believe me now, or hate me later. Just go ahead. Forget adverbs. Adverbs are useless. Adverbs are the word that says weak verb ahead. Okay? It's a signpost. We don't want that signpost. We want to have strong verbs, or we want to have verbs that don't attract attention. One or the other. Choose them. Choose. Okay. But a leech clung to his thigh. I was like, ooh, I love leeches. A leech clung to his thigh, but this, Sri Charan, this tells me that you're inventing it as you're going along. But he pulled it out when it began to tickle him. Do you notice anything about that sentence? This is a little test.
Um, no.
Okay, I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the sequence
Okay.
of events. It has to do with the sequence of events. Ram's coming
No,
in. He
still
wants to
I'm
take
lost. Okay.
it. Tickled him, then he pulled it out. That's the sequence,
Okay.
right? It tickled him, then he pulled it out. In fact, he doesn't even know that the leech is on his thigh until it tickles him. He felt a tickle. He looked and saw a leech. He pulled it out. Narrative. Okay. We write narratives. Narratives are a sequence of events. Embed that in your mind like crazy. If we want, remember I was talking to Madhavi about momentum? The way we create, are you, Sritran, are you frozen? I fear. You look frozen. Okay, well I'm gonna carry on anyway. Sorry, Sritran. The narrative is a sequence of events. we want to have momentum, and therefore what we do generally is we write one event, next event, next event, next event, next event. We go in order through our sequence of events, and we very seldom diverge from that.
Sorry, my connection.
Oh yeah, I see you got. Are you with us? Well, Sritran, sorry about that. I'm going to let me. I was going to say in closing that so it's very common for us to write like this, right? Where we're sort of playing catch up with ourselves. We're imagining as we're going along, and it shows me, right? And it can show us too when we look at our own drafts that we're basically inventing as we're writing, which is fine. We invent as we write, and we go down the merry path, right? When we come back to it and revise, I will generally suggest that we try to unravel our work so that we are writing a sequence of events that corresponds to the reader's experience. So they're going forward like this. You want them to go forward, and you want them to read events that are also going forward. You don't want them to go forward, but have the events that they're reading suddenly go backwards. That creates a problem, a kind of dissonance between the reader's experience and the imagined experience, if we can understand that. So anyway, this is a good start on this piece. I like the characters that you're developing here, and I would, as I say, I think I would bring it a little closer to home, because I think that that's going to create a more unique environment in this piece. Ram, shall we talk about your work?
Sure.
I think, unfortunately, that Sritran is having technical difficulties. Okay, so you gave us two pieces,
Yep.
and why don't we? I'm gonna. Okay, what we'll do is, why don't you just tell us? You gave us two, and I was able to read both of them. So, you just give us a little bit of setup. Which the first piece is really that same premise that you gave us last week,
Yeah.
where there's sort of like this tug of war between the mom and the daughter, and you're trying to figure out basically how to create that envelope that's going to then present
Right.
the Sitta story. Okay, so why don't you just explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah. So the envelope structure is that we have a mother and a daughter. The mother is a very traditional kind of a person, and the daughter is a teen. She's a young adolescent, maybe about 15 years old, and she thinks her friends are cool, and things like all this. My the futuristic fiction set in alternate reality. She likes those things. She has a very dim view of the epics because she feels that they're regressive. So she has that kind of thinking. And there is this. So I started with the situation where the mother and daughter, they have a little bit of a confrontation. Currently, the confrontation is not that strong. I want to make it come out even more strongly, make it more contrasted. They have this confrontation, and then they have a conversation that sets the daughter thinking, and she tries to figure out about Sita. So in the epic Ramayana, we have it's about Rama, and Sita comes into the picture in the epic from the point of time that Rama gets married to Sita. While there are references to what Sita did before she got married, it's very stray references. We really don't know what happened. So through the mind of this 15-year-old, I have tried to reconstruct the life of Sita, because when Sita got married, she was also an adolescent. And I have tried to see how this young girl, this adolescent girl, can relate to Sita, who was herself an adolescent girl. So that's sort of what I've been trying to do. I know it's a very tall challenge, and I've been trying to send this
Uh-oh,
piece to. Yeah, it is.
you almost used the word, the death. It's like a death knell. Ambitious.
Ambitious.
Ambitious. It is ambitious. For the simple reason. I've circulated this piece to a couple of friends who are mothers with adolescent children, and they have given me some feedback, which sort of tells me that okay, I don't understand that situation at all, so I need to make some changes. Yes, but that has been the research that I've been doing. So in this piece, so what happens is that once the daughter has the conversation with the mother, she tries to figure out. About Sita, she finds that that doesn't exist. I mean, there is nowhere there is anything given about Sita before she got married. So she wonders, why don't I write a story on the basis of the research that I have done? So this is the young girl writing the story, and she starts with this part one, which is called The Girl Who Had No Name.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So the setup for this story, you're working on. We talked about it a
Yes.
bit last week,
Yeah,
and then yeah, that's right. You're reminding me now that what you set up here now is that basically we have this young girl who's now been motivated, and let's just say
right.
somehow, I'm not sure that that's all worked out, but let's say it's basically somehow that she's writing
Yeah,
this
yeah,
Sita's point of
yeah.
view and Sita's story. So that's pretty ambitious because that means that you have to understand the modern girl's point of view.
True.
How old are you placing her?
About 15 years old.
15. Okay. So, and is
So
she modern like
it passed
is
one
she
test. I gave it to my niece, who is about in her mid 20s. So this is an age that she can relate to, and she said she could relate to it. So that was a good test. But I gave it to a couple of mothers who are mothers of 15-year-old daughters, and they said that okay, you got the motivations completely wrong. This is not how they think. They said the story
well
is relatable, but they said this is not how 15-year-old girls think. So I am working on that.
well I
And in
think
fact, we did a big. Sorry, please go ahead.
well well I was going to say that one of the problems is I have a daughter who's 13 and
Uh-huh.
if you're placing in the modern world
Right.
uh you know this is a world that I don't know anything about, but the thing is when you're dealing when you're with everybody, but with girls maybe even particularly, everyone who's not them is stereotyping them like crazy. Okay, so everyone is like, oh, I know, oh yeah, she giggles, she does this, she does that, whatever. Even moms are doing it. Certainly, dads are doing it. Other people, even your niece, when she's 20, she's like, oh yeah, she's doing it. Everyone is creating stereotypes. The only person who's not creating a stereotype, of course, is the character themselves. No one
Right.
is a stereotype to themselves, and no one is a stereotype within themselves. They're absolutely uniquely them, and completely. They are not. There is no view of the outside. There's an interior. So yeah, so you're taking on a lot there.
Yeah.
And then you're basically like what you have to do is you have to understand that sort of modern perspective because then from that perspective, she's then inventing the
Yes.
Sita character.
Yeah.
She is also then dealing with all of these issues of stereotype, right?
Yes. Yes.
So she's now doing that. And
Yes.
in fact, as I see it in terms of as a conceit that you've developed here, that is what's most interesting. That is the
This is
most interesting thing that might be taking place, is that she would be engaged in this process, ideally to me, of challenging the stereotypes that she's bringing to the character that's like her. And I can see that being operated in parallel with
Mhm.
her own basically being stereotyped by people around her. And it becomes almost an investigation of that process, which is a natural process. I mean, it's
true.
natural for us to see someone else and basically try to figure them out, because when we figure them out, then we feel more comfortable, right? Rather than having a completely unknown quantity in front of us. We
Yeah.
try to put them in a box, in order to gain power in a sense over them. She would be doing that also with the Sita character. So I think that that is very intriguing, but it sounds a little ambitious.
It's an understatement. Actually, this is what you said is quite amazing, right? Because one of the mothers, the feedback that she gave me was precisely the same, that the reason why this 15-year-old girl decides to investigate about Sita, about whom she initially had a very bleak view. She was addicted to that, whatever, that Athenopolis, Persephone, or whatever. For her to leave that and come to this, there has to be a very strong motivation. And in fact, one of the feedback I got was from one of the mothers was that rather than the conversation between the mother and the daughter, which motivates the daughter to do it, there is a little bit of a hint of her breaking up with her friend, the child breaking up with her friend. So one of the suggestions was that why don't we explore that more, because that is more relatable to a 15-year-old. A mother comes and has a conversation. You can't get them to do their homework. How do you get them to research about Sita? So that was one of the feedback I got, and I thought that was something to ponder about. And I made one significant change also here, Otis. So the last time I had sent the initial part, it was the mother who was supposed to have narrated the story of Sita's childhood. But I changed that because after the conversation with your feedback, which was like very, very helpful, I realized that I was setting up a straw man. So now here with the daughter trying to reconstruct the story of Sita and the mother who has a very traditional opinion. So we have a traditional opinion and a daughter who is trying to relate. Then that sets up an interesting conflict. Also, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of getting involved in the story, there's some possibilities, but they all start off with trying to understand your character who's
Yes.
basically acting and what her motivation is. You're
Yeah.
doing a lot of work for that right now. It might be helpful. So Sita, how many lines does Sita actually have? It's in the Mahabharata or some other
In
work?
the Ramayana. In the Ramayana, if I look
In the
at it in
Ramayana.
percentage, I think maybe about 20%, maybe
20%
at
of the
best.
entire book?
Yeah, at
Oh, okay.
the best. Yeah, at the best.
So, so why not think of it? Why not just for yourself? You don't necessarily have to write this, but like, let's say you were to write what is known about her, right? So if you
Yeah,
had that, so like I'm looking at it, I'm thinking of it as like maybe it's a school assignment. So to create a school assignment in which basically what's known about her is here, right?
yes, yes,
And the assignment for the student is, let's say we only know about her at this point when she, let's say, gets married, right? So she's how old at that point? 15, you know,
I think she's
20.
12 if I remember.
So she's, quite young, and so that would be a lot to deal with probably. Um, so I mean, you're going to be creating a challenging assignment here, but and probably one that no one would ever give anyone. But you're a writer, so you can do what you want. So we have this story of her that can be presented, right? And then the assignment to the kid is imagine this character in the 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week before the marriage. Write that
Right.
week.
Okay.
Now we
Interesting.
take that and then we have her be like, this is the dumbest assignment ever, right? Or, it is like, but then basically she becomes involved in this piece of having to write what happens before,
Right.
right? And basically imagine and fill in this sort of background.
Interesting. Right. Okay.
Um,
Hmm. So we are covering a shorter time frame there, but we get to explore more deeply.
Well, what you're really exploring, what you're exploring is not Sita. You're exploring the grappling of the girl with the story of Sita. That's what
Right.
That's what you're writing about.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is which should, I mean, it will necessarily be a large comment. It'll be a comment about difference, but it will also be a comment about sameness, right?
Yes.
And I mean, very, I mean, I think potentially profound,
Yes.
but at the end of the day, still ambitious, Ram,
Yes.
still ambitious.
Very, very.
Um, okay, so let's talk about this piece just a little bit too. Oh,
Sure.
let's have you read this first part.
All right. For as long as she could remember, Sita had played with the earth alone. The earth, dry, crumbly dirt in the summer months and mushy, moist soil in the rains. And for as long as she could remember, King Janaka, her father, stood behind the carved stone entrance watching her play. He watched her play but never played with her. He was king after all. And she was 5 years old and a princess. Was she? Che che. Playing in the earth again? What kind of a princess plays in the earth? A girl not much bigger than Sita looked down at her. She is no princess, she's a foundling. Another girl standing next to the first one said. Sita didn't know what a foundling was, but knew an insult when she heard one. I'm not a foundling, I'm a princess, she said, standing up and placing her fists on her hips. Hee hee, the second girl giggled and whispered into the first girl's ears. Princess, she says, she doesn't even know how to behave. See, she soiled her silk dress. The first girl did not bother. She challenged Sita. You are not. You don't have a mother and father. Sita raised her chin. King Janaka is my father and Queen Sunanana is my mother. The second girl giggled. You can't even say Queen Sunayana properly. The first girl was undeterred by Sita's defiance. Yeah? Then why doesn't the queen carry you in her arms? Why don't you have a name? You are a foundling. She pointed a finger.
Okay, great. So a couple things here. I mean, this is, you'll continue to, think about this piece. One thing, I've mentioned this already. I really like foreign language in work. So it gives us it is my thing. So if you don't agree, just ignore me. And if it doesn't work, but I mean, I think that people who love to read language, they love language. They love the play of it. They love the sound of it. They want that experience. I mean, language is finally music. And the music and the rhythm of it is probably more important finally than the meanings of it at the end of the day. So I would love to see like she is a what is it? I mean, at this time period, is it an ancient Hindi or is it Sanskrit or I mean, I would love to see the word there,
Okay. Okay.
and maybe I mean, I don't want. I understand that I'm a little bit weird this way. I mean, I was just reading a text that was, talking about ancient Sumerian, and the fact that I know the difference between mi ba and mi ha, just blows my mind. The fact that I'm talking at all about ancient Sumerian words is like, I love it. So it might just be me, but I think getting involved in that really places us in more. The problem is when you write just in English, if you're writing about people who are not thinking or speaking in English, you're missing so much about them, of course, because
Right.
they're not thinking in English, and they're not living their lives or in their world in English. They it's different. So getting any sense of that, I feel becomes much deeper, a much deeper way of trying to understand who you're writing about. And then you do have a few words here that really stand out. So like foundling, which is kind of sounds a little archaic in English, would be so much more interesting if you go to the Sanskrit. And then once you go there, then you can even, the meanings of words becomes something for academics to discuss, but you can often tease out a lot that's very
Absolutely.
fascinating,
Absolutely.
by taking those places. Along with adverbs, something we should never write is the combination of girl and giggle. Those two words as a thing should never exist in any of our work. So let's go ahead and we're gonna all just get rid of that. You can believe me now or hate me later. Send me a text. Tell me how I'm wrong. It's fine. The thing about stereotypes, I've felt this for a long time. It's like when I taught workshops, you know, sometimes you get an argument. Someone would be like, "Stereotypes, they exist. You know, they exist." It's like I'm going to repeat: no one is a stereotype in their own mind. Stereotype is always something that comes from the outside and goes on to somebody. So that's first. But the second part is I don't have to get involved in arguments about whether they exist or not. It's not good writing. Everyone on our, if we can avoid cliche and stereotype in sentiment, in character, if we can avoid just those things in our work, we are actually probably on our path to doing something that's reasonable, you know, because we need to make it new. We don't want to write what everyone's already seen. So the simple way is to just actually omit it, right, Ram? It's nothing to us just not to write it, and then no one knows that we only have the stereotype. We just cut it out. We don't.
Right.
The act of writing is a little bit by like, you know, you go to your strengths, you know, and you don't show your weaknesses. You work on them, but don't show them. You know, so it's we you know, we as writers, we don't know all things. We're far from perfect. We're developing and learning about the world ourselves. So we just don't show what we don't know. We just leave it off the page. And I think this opening, I just want to look at this, Ram. You know, we've been working together, so I'm not, you know, pulling my punches with you. So for as long as she could remember, she had played in the earth. It's like, really? I mean, so we're not seizing our moment. I mean, we're starting. Why are we starting here? Why are we starting today? Why is this the moment of our beginning? You know, we don't have any time to waste in terms of this idea of grabbing our reader by the throat. We don't have time to waste. So we don't want to just back into our story. It doesn't sound like a real person, right? I mean,
Yeah.
who is this person? As long as I can remember, I played with the earth. I mean, what? No, I'm either playing with the earth or I'm not playing with the earth. I'm not thinking about how long I remembered it. I mean, that's not what I'm doing. And then she's alone. It's like, you know what it's like, Ram? It's like an origin myth. You know, she's like coming out of the ether, and you know, she's the cosmorial chaos, and then she suddenly is, and now she, you know, no.
Okay.
Let's just have a girl, you know,
Right.
sitting there doing something, you know. I would try and start. I think that we have a choice, kind of either to begin. There's two main things that we have to do when we begin a story, and you have your this girl is writing the story. When we have kids doing stuff like that, we just make them savants. No one notices when it's done right. We notice when it's not done right because we aren't that interested, or we don't know what's going on, or we're confused.
Right.
That's how we notice. It doesn't mean that our moms won't still read the work. They will. But will other people? That's the question.
True.
Our loved ones will read it no matter what. The people that we force and coerce, they'll read it. But will other people? That's the question.
Yeah.
I say we either start with the conflict or we start with the sympathetic resonance. Those are the two things that we need. Either conflict or sympathetic resonance. Most people start with conflict. So what are the issues? What is this story about? What's the energy and action? Sita, in 2 weeks you'll be married, the king said. Come here. She walked up. Are you scared? No. Then, well, whatever. Now start. You know, now go. Of course, that no will be ironic because that's the way stories work. And And then I did notice that the way this is playing out, which I enjoyed. Okay, I'm not saying I don't, and it reads like, and this is where I was getting this idea about like the the writer is putting it into forms that she already sort of thinks in, which is kind of interesting too. But it reads in the form of a myth or a fairy tale, right? It's like there's like we have two things, it's like the Baba Yaga stories. I don't know what stories, you're familiar with, but it's actually very interesting that in different cultures, these myths sometimes use different numbers, right? So the Baba Yaga stories from, the Russian Balkan region, they always work in threes. Most of the Grimm's fairy tales work in threes, right? There's the older brother, the middle brother, and the younger brother. There's a this. There's always, and it always goes through the same routine. And you have two of them here, but it was reminding me of that so much, and the flavor of it was sort of this sort of myth. But I want the girl who's writing it to say, wait a second, what am I doing? Writing a myth? Like I want her to be self-conscious of it, right? Self-conscious of the way she's just basically following forms, as opposed to actually doing something that's a act of discovery. Because I think that that's where the action of this story could be. Not basically going what you're putting on the table here is ambitious, right? You're throwing the gauntlet down and you're saying that she's going to try and discover this character, or you as a writer through her are going to try and have her discover this character of Sita beyond the cliche of the character, beyond the stereotype. So how is she going to do that? That is the question. This is actually our question for every single writer. How are we going to get beyond our own cliches? I think about this a lot. It's like, language is the way we think. And we've learned language in various patterns, and we've learned it with various kinds of depths and a sense of understanding. So if we're coming into a writing project, and this girl is coming into this writing project, how can she go beyond that? How can she go beyond the sort of her own presumptions? How can she actually have a discovery of something new that she does not already think? That's the question. And so that's the situation you're trying to create, which means that she's going to have to confront herself with her own presumptions and prejudices and stereotypes. Or she has a great teacher that confronts her with that. But I would kind of like, and you could think about that, but you could also just make her more, in a sense, more savvy. My daughter, I mean, maybe partially because she's, forced to live with me. I mean, she knows so much about storytelling and so much more about all of these things. I mean, more than I ever did. I mean, her vocabulary is already better than mine was in graduate school. So, you'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
How is this girl going to be able to confront her own stereotypes?
Right. I had a question actually, Otis. You mentioned that you made this point about language, and I think this is something we have discussed briefly also before. Now, the Indian languages, the idiom is very fluid. Okay, compared to English, which has a very rigid structure. So in Indian languages, the idiom is not that rigid. Like in English, if I say, how are you? That's a proper sentence construction. I cannot jumble the order of the words. I cannot say you are how. It makes no sense. But in Indian languages, we can do that.
That's
Right?
fascinating.
Like in Hindi, I say aap kaise ho. I can mix up the order of the words. It means the same. It might have a different tonality. It might have a slightly different connotation as to how the words are ordered, but it will continue to make sense. And that is the case for most Indian languages, right? And that is why I feel that sometimes, a lot of times, in Indian writing, the writing is fluid. It doesn't stick to too many structures. And I keep wondering if that happens because, though we are educated in the English language, all the cultural inputs that we are getting from the world all around us in this land, that is fluid. Like even the concept of time in the Indian, in our Puranas, etc., it is not linear. It is non-linear, right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if we look at a lot of our, like you look at the Ramayana, you look at the Mahabharata, you have a nested, like these Russian dolls, you have a nested frame structure. You will have a story in a story in a story in a story. There'll be flashback, there'll be flash forwards, and we seem to be comfortable with it.
Well, that is very, very interesting. That is very interesting. I'm not sure that we want to, spend much more time here talking about it, but I think it's something important to think about. Yes,
Yeah.
English. I mean, it is in fact one of the subjects of my book is actually language itself, because language creates the way we think. English,
Yes.
as you say, is very highly ordered, and there's another thing with English is that there's a great deal of subordination and domination, right?
Yes.
In
Absolutely.
English.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
so
Yes.
there's something that we're not talking about
Right.
that's simply supportive, and something that we're actually talking about. And
Right.
and I think that, I mean, we can talk about that as, assisting a kind of military command structure and all sorts of
Right.
things that I think are that end up being true. Also, the thing with English is that it's extremely binary, right? It has a
Mm.
lot of binaryisms, and it
Yes.
has this very rigid sequencing. Um, Good in some ways, but also easily abused, I think.
True.
Um,
True.
I'm interested in what you're saying about the Hindu language, and and I think we could have a conversation about, like,
Yeah.
how do you bring those ways of communicating into a kind of modern Indian story or Indian written art, so that
Right.
so it actually becomes revitalized. Because what's happened, it seems to me,
Absolutely.
worldwide, are these structures of English have dominated, through
True.
colonialism,
True.
have dominated other ways of thinking, which are different.
Yeah.
You know, how do you bring them back? How do you bring these other ways back so that we
Absolutely.
can start to think in different ways? I
Yeah.
I, I love that conversation. It does have that word attached to it,
Yes, it does.
ambitious, you know.
Yes. Yes.
But
Very much. Very much.
I I love problems. I would love, I mean, and I would love to see, like, is it possible? Well, we let's talk more. Let's talk more.
Yeah.
But I think now we're gonna have to say so long to that. But there's much to be said about that, Ram.
A lot, a lot. Like very, very simple example, right? To take the Ramayana. The Ramayana is supposed to be about Rama, but you have one entire book. It is made up of 7 books, each of about 2 to 3,000 verses. And if you take the one of the most popular books of the Ramayana, one of the 7 books is called Sundarakanda. And in Sundarakanda, Rama does not appear. He appears only towards the fag end of it. It is not about Rama in that entire book of about 3,000 verses, 2,400, I think. He just does not appear.
Hmm.
So it's like quite
Um,
fascinating.
yeah, and also I think it's where some of these things come into play too is when you think about translation.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh,
um,
yes, absolutely. Very, very difficult to translate an Indian language into English. Very, very difficult because it's not only about finding the right word, but the idiomatic conveyance of meaning, that it is very difficult to capture. I would in fact assume that maybe it might be easier to translate an Indian language into German, because I believe German also is not as rigid as English. That's what I heard. I don't know. Maybe it might be
mhm.
easier. I don't know. But yeah, an Indian language into English, I have attempted to translate some things and really, really struggled.
What would it be to translate something in English to Indian,
I haven't
to Hindi?
attempted that. I think I should attempt before I make a comment.
I think it's just an interesting idea because sometimes you can see like, I mean, you can see things
But that would be
obviously.
challenging too, right? Because I'm trying to take something in one direction. I'm taking something that is fluid and trying to fit that into something that is rigid, so it loses meaning. And I take the reverse also would be difficult, I guess. I take something rigid and try to fit it in the frame of something that is fluid. Then it creates confusion, probably. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I took a course this last year in an indigenous language here in the Pacific Northwest that I'm incorporating into my book, and I'm fascinated with these ideas because I mean we know already that the way the language that we have, language is the way we think,
Yeah, it is.
and so
Absolutely.
it's creating the patterns of the way we think.
Yeah.
And there isn't some hierarchy of good and, you know, less good in terms of how we think. There
No,
just isn't. It's just the
this
way
is
we think.
this is interesting because a lot of times when I write my first draft, when I'm writing it, it is very clear what I mean. But after 3 days, I look at it, I'm like wondering that, okay, I wrote this. When I say he said this, does the he refer to this person or that person? Because I realize that when I'm writing it, my thought patterns are in my native language. So it was very clear to me at that point of time. But later, when I am reading it in English, then that rigid structure comes in, and then I'm wondering, what did I write?
Oh, well, strangely enough, I have read things that I've written and I'm like, I don't know what this means. I do not know what this means, but I was definitely there. I definitely typed it. I don't think anyone else did. I've read things of mine. I've been like, who wrote this? And I'd be
Right.
like, and I can make no sense out of it. I'm like, all I can say is it must have made sense to me at the time. I don't even know what was going on.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny. Um, well, great. This stuff becomes very, very interesting to me, really. But
Yes, absolutely.
for now, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Appreciate your work, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
everyone. We'll and
Thank you.
please keep sending those pieces. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.